The electronic clock above the platform flickered 11:47 p.m. in harsh red digits. The sound of the train pulling away echoed in my chest long after it vanished down the dark tunnel. Its horn cut through the stale air, trailing away like the last hope I'd been holding on to. That was it, the last train out. My last chance to get home tonight, gone. I stood frozen for a moment, clutching the strap of my worn messenger bag. The cold seemed sharper now, as if the whole station knew I was stranded and decided to close in on me. A gust of wind whistled through the tiled corridor, smelling faintly of iron and dust. My shoulders slumped. It had been a long day at work, one of those days where every email feels heavier than it should, where the computer screen burns into your eyes, and by the time you leave, your body feels twice its weight. All I had wanted was to collapse into my bed. Instead, I was staring at a deserted train platform in the middle of the city, with nowhere to go. I let out a curse under my breath, the sound bouncing weakly off the high concrete walls. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, praying for a miracle, but the battery icon blinked a sharp red at 3%. No ride-hailing app would save me now, not with how far I lived, not at this hour. I scanned the station. It was nearly empty, the kind of emptiness that feels louder than a crowd. The fluorescent lights above flickered, buzzing like tired bees. The benches sat mostly bare, only a couple of commuters slouched against them, waiting for buses that would never come this late. And then I saw him. He was leaning against the far wall near the vending machines, arms crossed over his chest. At first, I thought he was just another stranded traveler, but something about him made me look twice. His frame was solid, broad-shouldered, even in casual clothes, a dark jacket, jeans, boots. His hair was cut short, neat in a way that spoke of discipline, not vanity. He wasn't scanning his phone or fidgeting like everyone else. He was just watching, not in a predatory way, but in a way that made you aware he noticed everything. The instinctive flicker of recognition hit me, cop. Maybe it was the way he stood, grounded and steady, like even the cold couldn't push him off balance. Maybe it was the faint outline of something clipped to his belt under the jacket. Or maybe it was just his eyes, calm and sharp all at once. I looked away quickly. The last thing I needed was to deal with some off-duty police officer. My experiences with them had always been complicated at best, hostile at worst. I tightened my grip on my bag and headed toward one of the benches, trying to ignore the sting in my fingers from the cold. I sat down and pulled my coat tighter around me, though it was thin, more fashion than function. The chill seeped through the fabric, gnawing at my bones. My mind kept running through options. Call a friend. But who would answer this late? Book a cheap motel, but the only ones nearby were the kind people warned you never to step into. I could sleep on the bench, but the thought of spending the night under these flickering lights, vulnerable and exposed, made my chest ache with unease. I glanced back toward the man. He hadn't moved. Still leaning there, still watching, though now his eyes seemed softer, less like surveillance and more like concern. I looked down quickly, heat creeping up my neck. I hated feeling so transparent, like he could see through my act of calm when inside I was unraveling. Minutes dragged by, each one colder than the last. My phone finally gave up, the screen going black. I cursed again, louder this time, and shoved it back into my pocket. That's when I heard footsteps. I tensed instinctively, my body stiffening as they drew closer. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him approach. Steady, unhurried, but deliberate. I kept my gaze fixed on the tiled floor, heart pounding. Rough night. His voice was low, warm. I blinked, then looked up. He was standing a few feet away, not too close, but close enough that I could see the faint lines around his eyes, the hint of stubble along his jaw. I missed the last train, I said, my voice sharper than I intended, like I needed to defend myself. He nodded slowly, as if I just confirmed something he already knew. His gaze dropped to the messenger bag at my side, then back to me. And no backup plan, I'm guessing. I hesitated, not wanting to admit how stranded I really was. I'll figure something out. The corner of his mouth tugged up slightly, not quite a smile, more like he found something about me familiar. He slid his hands into his jacket pockets, his posture easy. "You're shivering," he said softly. "I'm fine," I lied, even as my teeth nearly chattered. His head tilted, as if he were debating whether to push further. Then he sighed, his breath clouding in the cold air. "You look stranded. You can't stay here all night." There was no judgment in his tone, just matter-of-fact concern. The kind you hear from someone used to stepping in when people are at their worst moments. I swallowed, my throat dry. My gut instinct screamed not to trust strangers, least of all a man who practically radiated authority. But there was something else under his voice, something steady and genuine, that made me pause. He studied me for a beat, then said, gently but firmly, "Why don't you come with me?" For a moment, I just sat there, frozen. His words hung in the cold air between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I could cross. "Come with me." Every instinct in me screamed to be careful. You don't just follow strangers home, especially not someone who looks like he could snap you in half with a careless shove. And yet, he didn't radiate threat. He radiated steadiness. Authority, yes, but softened by something else. Something I couldn't quite name. Still, my walls went up. "Look, I appreciate it, but I don't even know you," I said, my voice tight. His brows lifted, and for a second, I thought he might get defensive. Instead, he let out a soft chuckle. "Fair point. You shouldn't trust random guys in train stations. But I promise I'm not as mysterious as I look." He pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open just long enough for me to see a police badge tucked inside. "Name's Mark. Off-duty, obviously." The badge glinted under the flickering fluorescent light. Instead of comfort, my chest clenched tighter. A cop. That was worse somehow. Cops carried too much weight in their presence, too much history. I'd grown up flinching when they passed by, convinced they could read every secret I carried. And the one secret I guarded most, the truth about who I was, always felt like the kind of thing a man with a badge could crush without even meaning to. I looked away, my throat suddenly dry. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "Honestly," he shrugged. "Yeah, but I get it if it doesn't." His tone stayed light, not pushing, not offended. He shifted his stance, hands still in his pockets. "Listen, I live about 10 minutes from here. Warm apartment, hot coffee. Safer than sleeping on this bench." I hugged my coat tighter. He wasn't wrong. I'd already pictured myself curled up on this cold bench, the sound of footsteps echoing through the night, every shadow a threat. And yet, following him felt like stepping into a different kind of danger. One I couldn't quite put words to. I started, then faltered. "I don't usually trust strangers," he finished for me, his lips quirking into a half-smile. "Good policy, but I'm not looking to take advantage of you. I just hate the thought of someone freezing out here. If it helps, you can keep your shoes on inside my place. That way, if I suddenly turn into a maniac, you can make a quick escape." Despite myself, a small laugh escaped me, muffled and awkward. His humor caught me off guard, dissolving some of the tension. "See," he said, grinning now, his eyes softening. "I can be funny." I studied him for a moment. There was no pressure in his stance, no edge to his voice, just an open door, waiting for me to step through. My heart still raced, but another voice, quieter, buried deep, whispered that maybe it was okay to lean on someone tonight, just this once. I blew out a shaky breath. 10 minutes, you said?" His smile grew genuine and warm. 10 minutes. Promise." We walked side by side through the sleeping streets. The city had a strange hush at night, its usual chaos muted, leaving behind only the hum of distant traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. Street lamps cast yellow pools of light on the pavement, and our shadows stretched long and thin as we moved. I kept my hands shoved deep in my pockets, trying not to notice how close he walked. Not close enough to invade, but close enough that I felt protected. It was ridiculous, really. I barely knew him, but his presence carried a weight that made the empty streets less intimidating. "So," he said after a while, breaking the silence, "did you miss the train because you were running late, or because you were daydreaming?" I shot him a sidelong glance. "Does it matter? Just trying to get a sense of who I'm rescuing." he said lightly. I wasn't daydreaming, I muttered. Work kept me late. I thought I had enough time. Ah, he said, nodding. So you're the responsible type. I was hoping you were the reckless kind. It would make me feel better about dragging you off into the night. I gave him a look, and he laughed. The sound was rich, unguarded, and for a second, I caught a glimpse of the man beneath the badge, beneath the broad shoulders. Not just a cop, not just a stranger. Someone who laughed easily, who wanted me to laugh too. You always this charming? I asked before I could stop myself. Only when I'm trying to convince someone not to bolt, he said with a wink. Heat crept up the back of my neck, and I turned my gaze back to the sidewalk. I hated how easily he got under my skin, how quickly I noticed things. His smile, the warmth in his voice, the way his stride slowed slightly to match mine. Little things that shouldn't matter, but did. We fell into silence again, but it wasn't as uncomfortable this time. My mind churned with questions I couldn't ask. Was he gay? Did he know I was? Or was I just projecting, desperate for connection? The thought of misreading him made my stomach twist. Men like him, confident, masculine, carrying authority, rarely looked at men like me that way. And yet, every so often, I'd catch him glancing at me, like he was checking to make sure I was still there, like he wanted to say more but didn't. Each glance sent a small flutter through me, one I tried hard to suppress. By the time we reached his building, my nerves were buzzing. It was a modest brick apartment complex tucked on a quiet street, the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. He stopped at the entrance, pulling out his keys, and turned to me. This is it, he said simply. I stared at the doorway, my heart thudding. Suddenly, the reality hit me. Going inside meant more than just shelter. It meant stepping into his world, lowering my guard. What if this was a mistake? What if I couldn't read his intentions? My feet rooted to the sidewalk. Maybe I should just find a motel, I said weakly. He studied me, his key still poised at the lock. He didn't sigh or roll his eyes. Instead, he leaned back slightly, giving me space. You could, he said calmly. And if that's what makes you feel safe, I won't stop you. But the offer's still here. No strings attached. I searched his face for any sign of deceit, but all I saw was patience. His eyes met mine steadily, not demanding, not pleading, just waiting. A long breath left me. Curiosity gnawed at my hesitation, louder than fear. Something about him pulled me in, like gravity, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if I walked away, I'd regret it. Finally, I nodded. Okay. His smile was small, relieved, but not triumphant. He just opened the door and said, softly, welcome. And with that, I stepped inside. The first thing that struck me when I stepped inside his apartment was the warmth. Not just the physical kind, though the rush of heat against my frozen skin nearly made me sigh out loud. It was the other kind, the kind you don't expect in a stranger's home. The space was modest, small enough that you could see most of it from the doorway, but it carried a lived-in comfort. A soft couch with a plaid throw blanket slung carelessly across the back. A bookshelf crammed with novels, some leaning at odd angles. Framed photos on the walls, family, friends, maybe even coworkers. The faint smell of coffee lingered in the air, mingling with something woodsy, like cedar. It didn't look like the place of a man who spent his days enforcing rules and carrying a gun. It looked like the place of someone who cared about belonging. Not bad for a bachelor pad, right? He said, locking the door behind us. I managed a small smile. Better than I expected. He laughed softly, then gestured toward the couch. Make yourself comfortable. I'll put some coffee on. I hesitated by the door for a beat, unsure if I should really let myself relax. But the couch looked so inviting, and my body was aching from the cold. So I sat, sinking into the cushions, my bag at my feet. He disappeared into the small kitchen, his movements purposeful, easy. I could hear the clatter of mugs, the hiss of water heating. My gaze drifted to the photos on the wall again. One showed him in uniform, standing beside a woman who must have been his sister. They had the same smile, the same set to their jaw. Another was of him and an older couple, probably his parents, grinning at some backyard barbecue. And another, more recent, showed him with a dog. A golden retriever, tongue-lolling happily. Something in my chest eased. He wasn't just a cop. He was a son, a brother, maybe a dog owner. Person. He came back a few minutes later with 2 steaming mugs, setting one down on the coffee table in front of me. Here. Careful, it's hot. Thanks, I murmured, wrapping my hands around the mug. The heat seeped into my frozen fingers, almost painfully at first, then soothing. He sat across from me, stretching his long legs out, looking far more relaxed than he had at the station. So, what's your name? Or should I keep calling you Train Guy? A reluctant smile tugged at my lips. Daniel. Daniel, he repeated, as if testing how it felt. Then he extended a hand across the coffee table. Mark. I shook it, his grip firm but not overbearing. For a moment, we lingered in the contact before I pulled back, unsettled by how warm it made me feel. We talked at first about small things. Work, commutes, the ridiculous unreliability of the transit system. I learned that he'd been on the force for almost 10 years, stationed mostly in community outreach, though he occasionally worked patrol. He spoke about it with a kind of quiet pride, but also with hints of weariness. It's not an easy job, he admitted, staring into his mug. People either love you or hate you before they even know you. Sounds exhausting, I said. He chuckled. It is, but sometimes you get to help someone in a way that sticks. That makes the rest worth it. His eyes flicked up to mine. Like tonight. I looked away quickly, heat rising to my face. You don't even know me. Not yet, he said simply. The words sat between us, heavier than they should have been. I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch. Then, gently, I asked, don't you get lonely? Living here by yourself? He leaned back, exhaling. More than I'd like to admit. The job doesn't exactly make it easy to hold on to relationships. People see the badge before they see me. Makes dating complicated. I hesitated, my heart thudding. Complicated how? His gaze held mine, steady and unflinching. Because I'm gay. And being gay with this job. It's not something everyone understands. Some cops don't want to ride with you. Some people you date don't want to deal with the baggage. You get used to being alone. I stared at him, startled by his honesty. I hadn't expected him to say it outright, not so soon, not to me. My guard, the one I had built so carefully all night, cracked just a little. I know the feeling, I admitted, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Not the cop part, but the alone part. Feels like no matter where I go, I'm too much or not enough. He tilted his head, his eyes softening. You're not alone tonight. Something twisted in my chest. I tried to swallow it down, but the words hit deeper than they should have. I wanted to look away, but his gaze held me, steady and patient. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. The conversation lightened after that, as if both of us needed air after dipping too deep. We joked about the terrible coffee. He teased me about nearly falling asleep on the couch. I teased him back about the lopsided painting above his TV. Laughter slipped out of me more easily than I expected. Real laughter, the kind that shakes loose something heavy inside. He laughed with me, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his voice low and warm. Every time our eyes met, something fluttered in my chest, something I wasn't ready to name. It wasn't just attraction, though I couldn't deny that was there. The way his smile lingered, the way his forearm flexed when he leaned forward, the way his voice seemed to settle into me like a melody I wanted to hear again. It was also safety, a kind of rare comfort, like the universe had carved out this moment just to remind me what it felt like not to be on guard. Hours passed without me realizing it. The clock ticked quietly on the wall, but neither of us seemed to care. The night outside pressed against the windows, but here, inside his small apartment, it felt like we'd built a world just big enough for two. Eventually, the words faded, replaced by a gentle silence. He stretched out on the couch opposite me, one arm draped over the back, his gaze drifting but thoughtful. I sat curled with my mug, half empty now, my body warm, my eyelids heavy but unwilling to close. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It pulsed with possibility. Every shift, every glance carried weight. Were we just two lonely men filling the night with company? Or was it something more, something fragile and new, waiting for us to reach for it? I didn't know. He didn't either, judging by the way his fingers tapped absently against the armrest, as though holding back from crossing the space between us. But in that moment, under the soft glow of the lamp and the faint hum of the heater, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. The clock on the wall ticked past 1 in the morning, but I barely noticed. The coffee in my mug had long gone cold, and yet I still cradled it in my hands as if it were a shield. The warmth between us was no longer from caffeine or heat. It was the quiet pull of two people sitting too close to the truth to ignore it much longer. Mark leaned back against the couch, his arm draped along the backrest, his shirt rumpled, his expression softer than I'd seen it all night. The silence between us grew heavier, like it was daring one of us to crack it open. I did first. "Can I tell you something?" My voice wavered, betraying how much courage it took. He shifted, turning toward me. "Of course." I stared down at the chipped edge of my mug, trying to gather the words. I wasn't lying earlier, about feeling like I'm always too much or not enough. It's not just loneliness. It's... I trailed off, my throat tightening. I just got out of something. A relationship. Or whatever you'd call a year of slowly tearing each other down until one of us couldn't take it anymore. His brow furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. I swallowed hard. He said I was embarrassing, too emotional, too soft. Like dating me was something he had to apologize for when his friends asked. And I stayed, because I thought maybe if I changed, if I tried harder, he'd stop looking at me like I was this weight dragging him down. The confession cracked something open inside me, and I hated how my voice trembled. When he finally left, he said I wasn't what he wanted. That maybe I'd never be what anyone wanted. And the thing is, I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. I believed him. The words hung in the air, raw and ugly. I hadn't meant to spill so much, not to a man I'd met barely 2 hours ago. But the way Mark was looking at me, steady, unflinching, not with pity but with genuine attention, made it impossible to hold back. For a moment he said nothing. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his voice low. "That wasn't about you. That was about him." I looked up, startled. "You weren't too much or not enough," he continued. "You were exactly who you are." And that scared him. Weak people always punish others for the things they can't face in themselves. I blinked, fighting the sting in my eyes. His words were simple, but they cut through the fog I'd been carrying. "And for what it's worth," he added softer now, "you don't strike me as a weight. You strike me as someone worth knowing." My chest tightened, warmth flooding me in a way that had nothing to do with the heater humming in the corner. I wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. I let out a shaky laugh, rubbing at my face. "You're too good at this." "Not really," he said, leaning back again. His gaze flicked toward the photos on his wall, lingering there as if they might steady him. "Truth is, I'm just as much of a mess as anyone else." I tilted my head. "Yeah? You don't seem like it." He gave me a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's the point. I can't let people see it. Not with this job. Not with the badge. I'm supposed to be this unshakable figure, someone who has it all together. But..." He paused, exhaling. "It's hard. Balancing who I am with what people expect me to be." The room seemed to shrink as he spoke, the weight of his honesty pressing in around us. "Being gay in this line of work?" He shook his head. "It's like living a double life. Most guys at the precinct don't say anything outright, but I see the looks, hear the jokes. If I'm too open, I'm a target. If I'm too closed, I'm miserable. So I float somewhere in between, never fully belonging anywhere." His voice dipped, quieter now. "It gets lonely, really lonely." I stared at him, my heart twisting. For all his broad shoulders and steady presence, I saw the cracks now, the weight he carried behind his calm exterior. He wasn't untouchable. He was human just like me. "Mark," I started, but my voice faltered. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound hollow. He met my eyes, and the silence that followed stretched taut. Long enough for my pulse to thrum in my ears. Long enough for the air between us to feel electric. My hand twitched against my thigh, and his did too. Close, almost brushing, but not quite. It would have been so easy to close that gap, to let my fingers slip against his, to anchor myself to the warmth I knew was there. But I didn't, and neither did he. The moment lingered, heavy with possibility, until it broke under the weight of my fear. I pulled my hand back, curling it into a fist. He noticed, of course. His jaw tightened, his gaze flicking away. The rejection wasn't real. Not yet. But the fear of it roared in my chest. What if I'd misread everything? What if he wasn't looking at me that way? What if the flickers I thought I saw in his eyes were nothing more than my desperate imagination? I wrapped my arms around myself, as if I could shield against the ache. The room fell into silence again, but this time it was charged, almost unbearable. And then, as if the universe wanted to add its own punctuation, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then cut out entirely. The apartment plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the city leaking through the curtains. The hum of the heater died, replaced by the sudden rush of rain against the windows, heavy and insistent. "Perfect timing," Mark muttered in the dark. I could hear the faint humor in his voice, though it was laced with something else, something softer. My heartbeat raced, every sound amplified now. The storm outside hammered against the glass, filling the silence we couldn't. My eyes adjusted slowly, picking out his silhouette on the couch across from me, still and steady. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words caught. And then he spoke. "You don't have to hide here." The words landed like a lifeline tossed across a raging sea. Gentle but unshakable. An invitation, not a command. I drew in a sharp breath, my chest tightening. In the dark, with the rain pouring and the world outside erased, it felt like he was offering me more than shelter. He was offering me a place to stop shrinking, to stop pretending, to simply be. And for the first time that night, I believed I might take it. The rain beat against the windows like 1,000 tiny drums, drowning out the hum of the city. The power was still out, leaving the room wrapped in shadows, the only light a dim glow from the street lamps seeping through the curtains. I sat frozen on the couch, his words echoing inside me. "You don't have to hide here." My chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. Did he mean it the way I thought he did? Or was it just kindness? A reassurance that his apartment was safe from more than just the storm outside? I wanted to ask, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I sat there trembling, nerves buzzing so loudly I swore he could hear them. This was dangerous territory. Every heartbreak, every rejection, every warning voice in my head screamed that I shouldn't assume, that I shouldn't lean in to hope. I'd misread signals before. I'd made the mistake of thinking someone wanted me, only to find out I'd been nothing more than a joke, a phase, a mistake. But there was something in the way Mark was looking at me now, steady, unwavering, that felt different. Still, fear held me in place. I shifted slightly, pulling my knees closer to my chest, as though curling in on myself might keep me safe. He noticed, of course. He always noticed. "Daniel," he said softly. My name in his voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. Not an order, not a casual address. Something gentler, threaded with care. When I looked up, his silhouette was closer than it had been a moment ago. He had leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze locked on me. My pulse hammered in my ears. "This might sound insane," I whispered, forcing the words past my fear. "But I can't tell if I'm making this up in my head, if I'm just wishing too hard." For a long moment he didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached out across the space between us, his hand hovering just shy of my shoulder, waiting. Not claiming, not demanding, waiting. Every nerve in my body screamed to flinch, to pull back. And yet I didn't. When his hand finally landed, the weight of it was almost unbearable in its gentleness. Warm, steady, grounding. My breath hitched, and I felt the tension in my chest loosen, just a little. "You're not imagining it," he said quietly. The world seemed to tilt. My lips parted, but no sound came out. I stared at him, heart in my throat. He shifted closer, his hand still on my shoulder, his touch firm enough to anchor me but light enough that I could slip away if I wanted. The rain roared outside, but inside, everything slowed to the rhythm of my own uneven breaths. "Mark," I whispered, my voice trembling. He tilted his head, his face so close now that I could see the outline of his jaw, the faint shadow of stubble. His eyes searched mine, patient, asking without words. And in that moment, something inside me broke free. The fear didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip just enough for me to lean forward, just enough to meet him halfway. Our lips touched. It wasn't the kind of kiss movies teach you to expect. No dramatic crash, no instant surrender. It was hesitant, slow, almost clumsy in its uncertainty. My lips trembled against his, my entire body taut with nerves. But then, I felt him breathe, a soft exhale against my mouth, steady and calm. His hand squeezed gently at my shoulder, grounding me. And just like that, the panic ebbed. The kiss deepened slightly, not with hunger, but with care. He wasn't trying to consume me. He was simply there, present, letting me know I wasn't alone in this. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I let myself believe I was wanted. Not as someone to fix, not as someone to hide, but just as I was. When we finally pulled apart, it wasn't with regret. It was with the kind of quiet you don't dare break too quickly. My forehead rested lightly against his, our breaths mingling. My chest felt light and heavy all at once. "Was that okay?" he asked, his voice a whisper barely audible over the storm. I let out a shaky laugh, my lips still tingling. "Yeah, more than okay." We didn't rush. We didn't tumble into something frantic or desperate. Instead, we sat back, both of us leaning into the couch, our bodies still humming with the echo of what just happened. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was full, heavy with meaning, light with relief. Eventually, I found my voice again. "I wasn't expecting this." "Neither was I," he admitted, rubbing a hand over his face. "But I don't regret it." "Me neither." Our eyes met again, and the smile that tugged at his lips made something warm bloom in my chest. He leaned back, stretching his arms out along the couch, and I found myself watching him, memorizing the shape of his hands, the curve of his smile. He caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. "What?" he teased gently. I shook my head, embarrassed, but couldn't hide my grin. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. We kept talking, our words softer now, stripped of the armor we'd both worn earlier in the night. He told me about his sister, how she teased him relentlessly but was the first to defend him when others didn't. He told me about his dog, how he'd rescued her from a shelter, and how she had rescued him right back. I told him about the books I loved, the small joys that kept me afloat when everything else felt heavy. I told him about the heartbreak I'd shared earlier, but this time without the bitterness. Because now, it felt like part of a past I was ready to leave behind. The rain softened outside, tapering into a steady rhythm. Inside, the quiet grew more comfortable, as if we'd known each other longer than just a few hours. At some point, my body betrayed me. Exhaustion weighed down my eyelids, and I stifled a yawn. Mark noticed, of course. "You should get some rest," he said gently. I nodded, but I didn't move. Neither did he. Instead, we shifted almost instinctively, closing the space between us. I leaned against him, my head finding the curve of his shoulder, his arm draping across the back of the couch to pull me just slightly closer. The steady rise and fall of his breathing calmed me. My hand slid across the cushion until it found his. He didn't hesitate. His fingers intertwined with mine, firm and reassuring. And that was it. No rushing, no expectations. Just two men sitting in the dark, holding on to each other like the world outside could wait until morning. My last thought before sleep tugged me under was simple but powerful. For the first time in so long, I felt safe. I woke to the smell of something warm and savory drifting through the air. For a disoriented second, I thought I'd fallen asleep on my own couch, the memory of the night before some elaborate dream. But then I opened my eyes and saw the unfamiliar room bathed in soft gold morning light, curtains glowing faintly as the city hummed awake outside. And then I felt the weight of a hand still loosely curled around mine. Mark was gone from the couch, but our fingers had slipped apart sometime in the night. I blinked, rubbing sleep from my eyes, my chest tight with the realization that I hadn't dreamt any of it. The storm, the kiss, the way I'd fallen asleep with my head against his shoulder. It had all really happened. The muffled clatter of pans came from the kitchen. I sat up slowly, stretching out the stiffness in my back. My jacket had slid halfway off in the night, and I tugged it back into place before padding toward the sound. Mark stood at the stove, spatula in hand, barefoot in sweatpants and a t-shirt. The sight nearly made me laugh. So different from the solid, unreadable presence I'd met at the train station. He looked normal, human, almost domestic. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard me. "Morning, train guy." I rolled my eyes, but a smile tugged at my lips. "You're really going to stick with that nickname? Until I come up with something better," he teased, turning back to flip whatever was sizzling in the pan. "Coffee's ready, by the way. Mugs are in the cabinet by the sink." I busied myself with pouring a cup, grateful for something to do with my hands. The rich bitterness steadied me as I sat at the small kitchen table, watching him move. "You didn't have to cook," I said. He shrugged. "Didn't seem right to let you leave on an empty stomach. Besides, I like cooking." There was something soothing about the casual ease in his voice, the way he said it without expectation. Like this was just normal for him. And maybe, in some alternate universe, this could have been a normal morning for us. Two people sharing a kitchen instead of tiptoeing around whatever fragile thing had bloomed last night. When he finally set plates on the table, scrambled eggs, toast, a little fruit, I couldn't help but laugh. "What?" he asked, feigning offense. "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "It's just, you don't look very intimidating when you're carrying toast." He smirked, sliding into the chair across from me. "Good. Maybe that'll make you less afraid to eat in front of me." The banter came easily, surprising me. The awkwardness I'd braced myself for wasn't there. Not really. It lingered faintly in the pauses, but each joke, each smile smoothed it out. Still, as we ate, the weight of unspoken questions sat between us. What did last night mean? Was it real, or was it just two lonely people clinging to each other in a storm? I set my fork down, the food suddenly harder to swallow. "So," I started, not sure how to phrase it. "About last night." Mark leaned back slightly, setting his own fork down. His expression was unreadable for a beat, then softened. "Yeah, I've been thinking about that too." I fiddled with the edge of my napkin. Do you think it was just a mistake?" he finished gently. The word hung heavy in the air. I nodded, not trusting myself to say it aloud. He exhaled slowly, leaning forward again, resting his forearms on the table. His gaze locked on mine, steady but unguarded. "I don't think it was a mistake. At least, it didn't feel that way to me." My chest tightened. "Really? Really?" His lips curved into the faintest smile, one that didn't quite hide the nerves in his eyes. "I haven't felt like that in a long time, and I don't want to pretend it didn't happen." Something fragile inside me stirred. Hope, fear, both tangled together. Then he asked, softly, "Would you want to see me again?" The question pierced through me. My instinct was to recoil, to protect myself. Because what if this was temporary? What if he woke up tomorrow and changed his mind? What if I let myself want this too much and it slipped away like everything else had? I stared down at my hands, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can handle another disappointment." "I get that," he said quietly. "But I'm not asking you to promise me forever. Just another day, another cup of coffee, another walk. That's all." The simplicity of it broke me open. He wasn't asking me to leap, just to take one step. I looked up, meeting his eyes. They were patient, steady, but there was something vulnerable there too, something that mirrored the fear in my own chest. And in that reflection I found my answer. "Yeah," I said, my voice trembling but sure. "I'd like that." His smile then was small, almost shy, but it lit something warm inside me. We didn't say much after that. We just finished breakfast, sipping coffee between quiet smiles. But the silence was different now, lighter, less uncertain. As I glanced out the window at the rain-washed streets, I felt a tentative hope unfurl inside me. Last night had begun with hesitation, fear, and exhaustion. But this morning felt like the start of something I hadn't dared believe in for a long time. And as I sat there across from Mark, sunlight painting the edges of his face, I let myself believe it might last. Weeks slipped by almost before I realized it. What started as a single night, born out of missed trains and storms, turned into something steady, something I found myself waiting for each day. It began with texts, short, careful ones at first. "Hope you made it home safe. Rough shift today, but coffee tomorrow?" I'd stare at my phone longer than I cared to admit, my heart thumping at the sight of his name lighting up my screen. Then came coffee dates. Always small, tucked-away cafes, the kind where no one seemed to notice us lingering at a corner table. We talked for hours about nothing and everything. Music, books, the absurdities of our jobs. Sometimes we teased each other. Sometimes we sat in comfortable silence, and every time I left, I felt lighter, like I'd been carrying something all day and only then set it down. But even as things grew, challenges threaded their way through. Mark was careful, always careful. When we walked together in public, his hand brushed mine only by accident, never on purpose. If we sat too close, he shifted slightly when people passed. I knew why. The badge, the uniform, the silent judgment of his co-workers. All of it weighed on him. He'd spent years carving out a balance between hiding and surviving. Letting go of that wasn't easy. I tried to understand, I really did. But sometimes the distance stung. I'd catch myself wondering if he was ashamed of me, or if one day he'd decide the effort wasn't worth it. Those old insecurities, "You're too much, you're not enough," whispered louder on days when his walls felt higher. He noticed, of course. He always noticed. One evening, after we'd left a cafe and walked in silence longer than usual, he stopped me on the corner of a quiet street. His jaw was tight, his eyes clouded. "I'm not ashamed of you," he said suddenly, as if ripping the words out of himself. The sharpness in his voice startled me. "I didn't." "Yes, you did." He cut in, softer this time. He rubbed the back of his neck. "You think I'm pulling away because of you, but it's not that. It's habit. Survival. I've been hiding for so long it's second nature. But I don't want to hide from you." The honesty in his voice knocked the breath out of me. My chest ached, but this time not from fear, from something tender, something close to hope. "Then don't," I said quietly. His gaze met mine, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might reach for me right there, on the street. He didn't. Not yet. But he nodded, and that nod carried weight. Our first real date came a week later. Dinner at a small Italian place he'd found. A place where no one looked twice at two men sharing a bottle of wine. I'd been nervous, my stomach fluttering all day, afraid it would feel forced. But the moment he pulled out my chair with a grin and said, "See, I can be a gentleman," I relaxed. We lingered over pasta, trading stories. At one point, he laughed so hard at something I said that he nearly spilled his drink, and people at the next table turned to look. Instead of shrinking, he leaned closer, brushing his hand against mine under the table in plain sight. Not long, not dramatic, but enough to make my chest swell. After dinner, we walked the long way home. At a crosswalk, as we waited for the light to change, his fingers brushed mine. And this time, he didn't pull away. He just let them rest there, touching lightly, like a promise. The milestones kept coming. He introduced me to his dog, Bella, a golden retriever with boundless energy and an uncanny sense of when to wedge herself between us on the couch. She adored me instantly, which Mark teased me about endlessly. I met one of his friends, a fellow officer named Carla, who raised an eyebrow when he introduced me but smiled warmly after. Later, he admitted she was the first colleague he'd ever told. My throat tightened at that. And then, one night, the biggest step of all. We'd been watching a movie at his apartment, Bella snoring at our feet. The credits rolled, but neither of us moved. The air between us thickened with unspoken words, unspoken wants. My pulse quickened. "Stay," he murmured, his voice low, almost hesitant. I did. That night, for the first time, we didn't hold back. Not just in touches, but in trust. Every kiss was careful, every moment threaded with reverence. Like we were learning each other's language one syllable at a time. And when it was over, when we lay tangled together, his arm around me, his heartbeat steady against my cheek, I didn't feel exposed or afraid. I felt safe. Looking back, that was the moment something shifted inside me. For so long, love had been a battlefield where I was always on the losing side. I'd braced for betrayal, for rejection, for the slow erosion of myself in someone else's eyes. But with Mark, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit into his world. I was just here, wanted, seen. One evening, a few weeks later, we walked through the park together. The air was crisp, the trees bare but beautiful, their branches laced against a twilight sky. Families passed, couples strolled, the world moving around us in its usual rhythm. And then, without hesitation, he reached for my hand. Not a brush, not a test. He took it firmly, lacing our fingers together, and didn't let go. My breath caught. My old reflex was to glance around to see who might be watching, who might judge. But when I looked at him, calm, steady, a faint smile tugging at his lips, I realized it didn't matter. I squeezed his hand and he squeezed back. We walked like that for the rest of the evening, quiet but content. The street lamps flickered on one by one, the world dimming into night, but inside me, something glowed brighter than it ever had. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of love. I was living it. The station looked different now. Same tiled floors, same buzzing fluorescent lights, same faint smell of metal and dust. But it didn't feel the way it had that night. That night, the walls had pressed in on me, every shadow sharp, every sound too loud. That night, I'd been a man stranded, shivering on a bench, certain I had nowhere to go. Now, standing on the platform, I wasn't stranded. I was waiting. My messenger bag hung loosely at my side, lighter than I remembered it ever feeling. I checked the clock above the track. 7:02 p.m. The evening rush was thinning, leaving the station quieter, but not lonely. My heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with anticipation. And then I saw him. Mark's stride was easy, confident, cutting through the crowd without effort. He wasn't in uniform, just a dark jacket, jeans, boots. But his presence carried that same quiet authority I'd noticed the very first time. Except this time, when his eyes found mine, they softened instantly, and his mouth curved into the kind of smile that undid me every time. "Hey, train guy," he said as he reached me, his voice warm, teasing. I rolled my eyes but grinned anyway. "Still? You're never going to let that go, are you?" "Not a chance." He tilted his head, studying me with a tenderness I still wasn't used to. "You look good." "Thanks." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. It was ridiculous, how even after weeks of this, coffee dates, long walks, nights spent curled into each other, he could still make me blush like a teenager. We didn't rush to leave the platform. For a moment, we just stood there, side by side, watching the tracks hum quietly beneath the fading light. It hit me then, the symmetry of it all. The place where I thought I'd lost everything. My way home, my safety, my hope, was the place I'd found him. If I hadn't missed that train, if I hadn't been forced into that awful choice between freezing on a bench or following a stranger, none of this would have happened. Fate. The word felt cliché, like something out of a cheap romance novel. And yet, standing there beside him, it didn't feel cliché at all. Felt true. Mark must have noticed the way I fell quiet, because he nudged my shoulder gently. "What's going on in that head of yours?" I glanced at him, smiling softly. Just thinking about that night. How different everything feels now. His expression softened, his eyes catching mine. Yeah, me too. We left the station together, our steps falling easily in rhythm. Outside, the city glowed with evening lights, the air cool but not harsh. The rain from that long-ago night had been replaced by clear skies, a half-moon hanging high above. We walked without hurry, past familiar streets that no longer felt empty. You ever think about how close it was? I asked suddenly. Like, if I'd caught that train, if I hadn't been sitting there when you noticed me. I do, he admitted. More than I probably should. He squeezed the strap of his bag with one hand, thoughtful. I think about how easy it would have been to miss you, how easy it would have been to keep walking, to mind my own business. And then I think about how glad I am that I didn't. I stopped walking, turning to face him fully. The street lamps painted his features in gold and shadow, highlighting the quiet certainty in his eyes. That night, I said, my voice low, I thought I'd lost my way. I thought missing that train was the worst thing that could have happened. He tilted his head slightly, waiting. But really, I continued, my chest tightening. It led me home. To you. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city moved around us. Cars passing, voices drifting, footsteps echoing. But in that bubble of silence, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. He reached out, his hand warm as it closed around mine. We walked the rest of the way like that, hand in hand. Not brushing by accident, not tentative or half-hidden, open, steady, real. Passers-by glanced at us, some without interest, some with faint curiosity. But for once, I didn't care. Neither did he. His grip was firm, reassuring, his thumb brushing against my skin in quiet rhythms. Each step forward felt like a step into something bigger than just survival. It wasn't about trains missed or storms weathered anymore. It was about choosing each other every day, every small moment, every quiet walk through the city. The night air was crisp, the city alive, and for the first time in a long time, the future didn't terrify me. It felt wide open, filled with possibility. And as we turned down the street toward his place, our shadows stretching long ahead of us, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning.